The official cause was a freak wind, 20 meters a second. 9 days before they signed it, the city's own weather office had told them the wind was half that. This is the flood they blamed on the weather.
Down in the morning and the water on Frunze Street is going down. It had come up in the dark since 6. Gray water has been running out of the ravine at the end of the street, into the cellars, into the tram depot, over the curb. 2 fire engines were sent to pump it away. Men stood in it in their boots and swore at it. And now at 9:10, it is dropping. You can see the curb again. The trams start moving. It is Monday. Everyone is late. Somewhere between 9:10 and 20 past, the dam at the top of the ravine gives way. There is no crack, no warning. The word in the report is a heave. What ground does when it blows out from underneath? 650,000 cubic meters of liquid earth come down that ravine, 3 to 5 meters a second. Where it starts, it stands 8 to 10 meters high. It covers 30 hectares of the city in roughly half an hour. It takes the tram depot. It takes the trams, a trolley bus, a bus, and the 2 fire engines that came to help. The 13th of March, 1961, Kurenivka, Kyiv. What came down that ravine was not a landslide. It was pumped up there on purpose by the city for 11 years. Industrial waste from a brickworks with the consistency of wet cement. And the ravine it was pumped into was Babyn Yar. 3 things to hold on to. This was written down before it happened. 4 years before. In a letter by a man whose job was to notice. When the commission published, it named a wind of 20 meters a second. 9 days before that went to print, the Kyiv Weather Bureau had written to that same commission. The wind that morning was 7 to 9, and there was a trial. 6 men. It was not public. The file of that trial no longer exists. The court destroyed it. Expiry of the term of storage. 1 piece of paper about the weather does still exist. We will get to it. 10 o'clock in the morning. Let us start there. Slut. By 10 o'clock, the noise has stopped. Petroshelist, first secretary of the Communist Party of Ukraine, drives out to look. That evening he writes 4 lines in his diary. Went to the site of the catastrophe. The picture is terrible. Everything is flooded with water, silt, and sand, 2.5 to 3 meters deep. People are saving themselves on the roofs of houses and in the trees, 2.5 to 3 meters. That is the height of a room. An eyewitness, Anne Volk, from Frunze Park to the Podol descent, there stretched a terrible plain. Where once there had been a tram park, a factory, old houses, none of it was there. All of it was under a terrible thickness of mud. The mud sets. It is clay slurry. As the water drains out of it, it stops being a liquid and starts being ground. Whatever is inside it stays where it is. An internal report later that month gives a count. 133 bodies recovered. 3 more died in hospital. Add those 2 together and you have 136. The report does not say 136. Further down the same page it gives the total. 137. And its own breakdown agrees with the 7. 45 men, 86 women, 6 children. Their own count of their own dead is out by 1. Nobody ever went back and fixed it. That shape is not chance. It was 9:20 on a Monday. The men were mostly at their benches already. The women were still on their way. On the trams, in the shops, at the depot gate. The figure the state would publish is 145. Hold on to that number. It is going to be the smallest one anybody offers. To understand what came down that street, you have to know what it was and who made it. Kyiv had brickworks. To get it clay in quantity, you do not dig it. You wash it out. A jet of water under pressure cuts the clay face down. What comes off is neither earth nor water, but something between the two. Slurry. In the trade, they called it pulp. The pulp has to go somewhere. In 1950, the city decided where. There was a ravine on the northern edge of Kyiv, a big one, with 3 arms. The plan was to pump the waste of the brickworks into it, arm by arm, year by year, until the hole was full. Then you would have flat ground where you had a ravine. You could build on it. It is not a stupid idea. Cities do it. Cities still do it. By 1961, there were over 4 million cubic meters of pumped earth in that ravine. In the third arm alone, about 3.2 million. 4 million cubic meters of wet clay, sitting in a hole above a district of wooden houses, and the only thing holding it up there was a set of earth dams, built out of the same stuff. The ravine had a name. In the paperwork of the 50s, it is written plainly, in the mayor's own orders, Babyn Yar. Between 1941 and 43, the Germans shot close to 100,000 people there, most of them Jews. By 1950, there was a pipe running to it. I am going to leave that there, because the record leaves it there. The engineering papers do not mention it, not once, not one line in 11 years. They discuss the third arm, the design marks, the drainage capacity, the settling times. In the file, the ravine is a volume. It becomes a name again later, and not in the document. The 11th of February 1957, 4 years and 1 month before a letter goes out from the Special Inspectorate of the Podol District of Kyiv. 1 page, typed. Signed by the head of the inspectorate, a man named Lushenko. It is addressed to 2 men, the director of the Petrovsky Brickworks and the head of the Kyiv Hydromechanization Office, Boris Stepanuuk. Here is what it says. Owing to insufficient supervision by your workers on the hydraulic pulp, the ditch of Babyn Yar is always in an emergency state, especially in wintertime. The ditch is flooded, and water together with sand comes over the banks and floods the adjoining territories of enterprises and organizations. Then, 4 instructions. Build a settling basin. Release only clean water in small planned doses. Keep the ditch under systematic watch. Clear the silt out of it regularly. Item 4. In the event of the flooding of any adjoining territory with material damage, responsibility for the consequences is placed on you. The word in that letter is always, not once, not sometimes, always in an emergency state. This is not a prophecy. Nobody in 57 is predicting 8 meters of liquid earth. A man whose job was to look at ditches looked at a ditch. He saw it going over its banks into other people's yards and wrote to the man responsible and put in writing that if it ever did damage, it was on him. 4 years later, Boris Stepanuuk, the man that letter was addressed to, was arrested for this. The letter survived. It is in the Central Committee's archive as a certified copy. Somebody, at some point, thought it was worth keeping. By the end of 1960, the third arm of Babyn Yar was full. Not nearly full, full to the design mark, the level the project itself said was the end of it. There was supposed to be somewhere else to pump to by then. Another ravine. It was not ready. At a production meeting at the end of November, a foreman named Radkovsky stood up. We know this because a man called Dudchenko told the KGB about it, and the KGB typed it up. Radkovsky said the dumping in Babyn Yar could not continue. It had reached the design mark. He was told to hold on. That is the word, hold on. Keep going a little longer. The new site is not ready and the plan is the plan. The meeting was chaired by the head of the administration, Boris Stepanuuk, the same man who had received Lushenko's letter 3 years earlier. The file does not record which mouth the word came out of. On the 4th of March 1961, at another meeting, the head of the administration praised him. He had managed to hold on at the old dumps in Babyn Yar. He was meeting the plan. 9 days later, the dam went. Everything else in this story is detail. This is the disaster. A man who knew said stop. A system that had no way of saying stop said hold on. And then it said, thank you. Radkovsky was tried and sentenced to a term of imprisonment. Nothing happened to the plan. A dam like this is not held up by earth. It is held up by drainage. It only works if you take the water back out faster than you put it in. Everything that follows is a way of not doing that. The drawings called for 2 pipes, 450 millimeters across. It was built with 1. The wells themselves were in a neglected state. They were not taking water. The project required protective ridges a meter high along the crests of dams 1 and 2. The commission went and looked. They were not damaged, they were absent. The technology was pumped for 8 hours, then let it settle for 8 hours. On the eve of the disaster, they pumped for 16. And for the last 4 or 5 days, the water was not pumped off the dump at all. The chief engineer, Ivanchenko, explained why. The work up there was finishing. The water had got very dirty. Dirty water ruins the pumps. At night, the site was left with no technical supervision at all. Look at that list again. There is no villain in it. Every one of those is a small, sensible decision made by a tired man with a target. Pumps cost money. The plan is the plan. It is nearly ready anyway. Nobody gets up in the morning meaning to drown a district. That is not how a district gets drowned. First light on the 13th of March. There is one man on the dump, a laborer on duty, name of Solovey. At dawn he finds washouts in the dam, and he starts trying to fix them. That is his own account, and it is also the commission's. He goes down to the well on the second terrace, and finds it cannot take the water coming down off the third. Then he goes to the place where the fill is washing out beside dam number 3, and he tries to fill the breach by hand. By hand, a shovel in his arms, against a stream that is taking a dam away. He cannot do it. He goes back to the well on the third section, and satisfies himself that he cannot stop this alone, and he runs to the office of the construction section. It is about 7 in the morning. There was a telephone. The report notes, in the flat voice reports used, that he did not use it, for reasons not established, did not use the available means of communication. He reports the emergency state of the dam to the site master, Grinblatt, and the foreman, Radkovsky. The same Radkovsky, in the words of the report, showed slowness and did not take effective measures. The bulldozer driver, Ramenko, arrived at the site after the accident. That is the entire response of the Soviet state to the failure of a dam above a district. One laborer. On foot. Now go back down the hill, into the street, and start the clock at 6 in the morning. 6 o'clock. Water is already coming out of the ravine and into the district, into cellars, across the yards, onto Frunze Street. 6:30. The dispatcher at the Krasen tram depot telephones. A woman named Doronina. The water coming out of Babyn Yar is flooding the depot. 7:30. A man named Smirnov reaches the depot. The tram workers are trying to hold the water back with whatever is to hand. 2 fire engines arrive to pump the cellars out. Both of them will still be there in an hour and a half. Neither will be driven away. 9:15. A police colonel, Yevtukin, drives up from Kurenivka and cannot get down the street. It is flooded with silt, level with the curb. And at 8:30, this is in the commission's own report. The first secretary of the Podil District Committee arrives at the water on Frunze Street. P. Marshall, not afterwards, before. For 3 hours, the city knew that water was coming out of Babyn Yar into the streets. The tram depot knew. The fire brigade knew. The police knew. The first secretary of the district was standing in it. The trams ran. Then, at about 9:10, the water begins to fall. The level in the street drops. The worst of it, everyone can see, is over. And between 9:10 and 20 dam number 1 blows out. The commission's report names the eyewitnesses to that breach. There are 2 of them. One is a resident called Isakov. The other is P.K. Marshall. The first secretary of the district was standing in front of it when it opened. For 3 days, the state says nothing at all. On the 16th of March, Ukrainian radio broadcasts a short announcement. Part of the Kurenivka district has suffered damage and destruction. The government's resolution passed the same day, titled, "On the liquidation of the consequences of the slippage of soil from the Siret ravine." The Siret ravine, not Babyn Yar. The city did not wait to be told. From the first day, Kyivans walked out to Kurenivka to look, on foot in a steady stream, to stand at the edge of it and see it with their own eyes. And they stood there. And the Committee for State Security stood there with them. Operatives were sent to mix with the citizens who were viewing the site, and what they heard, they typed. A research fellow of the Institute of Zoology, name of Klibin, in our yard, 23 people died, and the total number of victims comes to 1,500. And 2 people standing in that crowd said something I want you to remember. They will find some little people, a safety engineer, somebody like that, and they will punish them most severely. And the widow of the writer Kurenivka, standing in the mud in her good coat, said this: guilty, of course, are the engineers and the bosses of the city administration, but they will punish only the foreman. She was standing in a crowd. She had no file. Hold on to what she said. On the 17th of March, the chairman of the Ukrainian KGB wrote to the Central Committee. On Saturday and Sunday, a large flow of residents of Kyiv to the site of the accident is expected. The organs of the KGB and the Interior Ministry are taking all necessary measures to prevent citizens from penetrating to the site of the works. And one request that the party send its activists into the crowds to conduct explanatory work. The evening paper found no room to report any of this. On the 14th of March, the day after, it ran a notice about a cake. It was called Cherry. It had 130 grams of cream to the kilo, where an ordinary sponge would have 400. And then there is the thing the state could not print and could not stop. The deputy chairman of the Jewish community, a man named Yarovsky, is recorded saying this: these are the bodies of the Jews shot by the Germans during the occupation. Risen up. Be clear about what you are looking at. That is not a ghost story. That is a police file. The KGB wrote those sentences down because they were dangerous, because a city that has been lied to will reach for whatever explanation has a shape to it. They had fenced the city off from the mud. They had not given it anything to put there instead. Now on the 16th of March, a government commission sits down in Kyiv. Academicians, hydraulic engineers, the men from the design institutes, including the men who drew this, a chairman named Bakuma, stenographers, taking it all down. The speeches from one session alone run to 46 sheets, and in that room they say it. Filaktov, of the Academy of Construction and Architecture, on the record. The catastrophe was inevitable. Events simply accelerated. They would have come sooner or later anyway, and the commission writes, in its own report, in its own words, the technical project was not reviewed and approved in the established manner, not in the Ministry of the Building Materials Industry, not in the Kyiv City Executive Committee. 11 years of pumping, 4 million cubic meters. The paper that authorized it was never legally approved by anyone. It goes on. The overall stability of the dump was never calculated. The class of the retaining structures was never established. There is a list of the men the commission called in to explain themselves. Near the bottom of it, Radkovsky, foreman, administration 610. The foreman who stood up in November and said the ravine was full. He is not here as a witness. He is here as a source. The commission's own report reconstructs that morning from what he tells them. He is helping them write the document that will convict him. There is a woman in this part of the file too. Irina Pobyhailo, head of the engineering department of the city's architecture administration. She tells them the city never received a complete project, so the city could not have approved one. So for about 2 weeks in March, the true account of the Kurenivka disaster existed. It was typed. It was stenographed. It was signed. It said the catastrophe was inevitable and that the project had never legally existed. And then they published. The 31st of March, Kurenivka, page 3. The report of the government commission. The first and last account ever published. By that evening, it is on every tram in Kyiv, and it is, in its way, a decent document. It admits errors in the project. It admits violations of the technology. It lists the losses: 7 tram cars, 1 trolleybus, 1 bus, and 2 fire engines which had arrived to pump water out of flooded cellars. They printed the fire engines, and then comes one sentence: under the action of a strong wind, whose speed on the day of the accident reached 20 meters per second, the water washed out the cofferdam and penetrated the liquefied soil of the lower layers. That is the picture the announcement asks you to hold. Hold it for a moment. 9 days before that went to print, a single sheet of typescript arrived from the Kyiv Weather Bureau, addressed to a member of that commission. According to the data of the meteorological station, Tolstoy Street, 14 on the 13th of March in the period from 7 to 10 hours, in Kyiv there was a west wind, 7 to 9 meters per second. Light rain, temperature 7 degrees above zero. Signed the head of the Kyiv Weather Bureau. 7 to 9 meters a second is the wind that flaps a coat. It is a wet Monday in March. This is the wind they printed. This is the wind that was there. They asked. They were answered. 9 days later they printed 20. And the reason is in the file too, in the KGB's own typing. Dated the 14th of March, 17 days before the announcement. Ministry staff, hearing that the prosecutor was investigating, are trying to present the catastrophe as a natural disaster. There are 2 more numbers in that announcement. It gives the flooded area as up to 25 hectares. The documents give at least 30. And it gives the time of the collapse as 8:30 in the morning. The Commission's own report puts the breach between 10 and 20 past 9, 50 minutes. The 50 minutes in which the water in the street was falling, and nobody stopped the trams. Those 50 minutes are not in the published account. In the published account, the wave and the first official arrived at the same moment. 145. That is the number in the announcement. It is the number on the memorial. It may well be true. Tetiana Yevstafieva, one of the first historians into these archives, defends it. Alexander Anisimov, a historian of Kyiv, argues the real figure is as high as 1,500. Petro Shelost, the first secretary, the man who drove out and looked at it, wrote in his own diary that 198 had died. He was head of the party in Ukraine. He had no reason to lie in a diary. He also had no particular reason to be right. Here is why the number cannot be closed. 20 excavators, 42 bulldozers, up to 450 lorries a day, 2 12-hour shifts, round the clock, no days off. Between the 13th of March and the 1st of April, they carried out 225,000 cubic meters. By the time they finished, 326,000 had been taken out of the district. 650,000 came down. 324,000 were never taken anywhere. They were turned over with the excavators and used to raise the ground of the district. Leveled, graded, rolled, and then the district was rebuilt on top of it. Foundations, then walls, then people. On the 20th of March, 7 days after, the trams were running on Frunze Street again. That is the historian's reason for doubting the figure upwards. Half of what came down on that district was never carried out of it. It was never searched. You cannot count what you have built on. 2 figures from the city's own accounts, in the weeks after. Payments to the injured citizens, 305,000 rubles. Carting the earth away, 668,000 rubles. It cost more than twice as much to move the mud as to pay the people it fell on. That is not a scandal. It is just what things cost. I mention it only because somebody had to type those 2 figures, one under the other. The prosecutor's report of the 22nd of March lists the men taken into custody. Boris Stepaniuk of Administration 610, the man who got the letter in 57, denies Ivanchenko, his chief engineer, the man who explained about the pumps. Yevhen Romasko, chief engineer of the trust above them. Convicted alongside them, 2 men from the Moscow design offices, Shepelenko and Anikiev. Their offense, in the words of the file, issuing the technical project with errors. And the 6th man, Yevhen Radkovsky, foreman, secretary of the party bureau of his own administration. The man who stood up in that room in November and said the ravine was full, who was told to hold on, who held on, whom the head of the administration held up on the 4th of March as an example. Radkovsky has no dumps either. And he works, he fulfills the plan, and his conditions are worse. 9 days later, the dam went. In the commission's finding, this is what he did that morning. Master Greenblatt and foreman Radkovsky showed slowness and took no effective measures. In the same archive, from the same weeks, the workers of his own section said this: Radkovsky took every possible measure to liquidate the accident, but it was already too late. Both of those sentences are in the same box. One of them sent him to prison. The trial is gone, so we cannot tell you which. David Chairman of the Kyiv City Executive Committee, the mayor, received a severe reprimand, the man who had signed the order to go on filling the ravine. He went out to the school on Frunze Street, where they were registering the survivors. A former architect, Yuri Bielus, remembered what happened when they saw him. The people who filled the yard threw themselves at him with their fists. They had been told nothing. He was the first man from the city they had seen. His guards quickly shoved him into the car. He drove off fast, and he never appeared there again. The Criminal Collegium of the Kyiv Oblast Court, Article 165, Part 2. Abuse of power or official position leading to grave consequences. 6 men were convicted. The trial was not public. In March, a writer's widow had stood in the crowd and said they would punish only the foreman. She was right that they would punish a foreman. She did not guess which one. The last line of the only account the Soviet state ever printed reads, "The persons guilty of the accident that occurred are being brought to account." In 2012, historians went looking for the file of that accounting. The Kyiv Oblast Court told them the materials of the criminal case had been destroyed. Somebody had to do that. Somebody carried the box down a corridor. Somebody untied the tapes. That folder was the record of what they did to the man who told them to stop. Somebody ruled a line through the entry in the register and wrote the reason beside it. Expiry of the term of storage. So they wrote to the Prosecutor General of Ukraine. The answer came back. Owing to the absence of data, the search for documents on the Kurenivka events gave no positive results. So the trial is gone. The stenograms survive. The engineer's drawings survive. The photographs survive. The KGB's notes on what people muttered in the bread queue survive. Because the secret police kept better records than the courts did, and in the state archive of the city of Kyiv, in the Commission's own working folder, Collection 1446, Inventory 1, File 8, on Sheet 3, there is a half page of typescript, west wind, 7 to 9 meters per second, light rain, 7 degrees above zero. That is the weather in Kyiv on the morning of the 13th of March, 1961. It is not in dispute. It never was. It would not have taken your hat off. They destroyed the record of the trial. They kept the weather. And the thing itself was not finished either. On the 20th of May, 2 months later, after a week of heavy rain, the ground in Babyn Yar moved again. There was still a commission sitting. Its first task was to stop it happening again. The ground under Kurenivka is partly the thing that fell on it. There is a park up there now, a road and grass and trams going over the top of it. You can stand on that ground, people do. It is a nice enough place. The state that built it wrote down what it had done, read what it had written, and printed something else. Both papers are still in the same box. The wind was 7 to 9 meters a second.